Grace Miller was only looking for the dishwasher warranty. That was all. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet in the ordinary way a house gets quiet after breakfast. The coffee maker had gone cold. Noah's backpack was gone from the chair. Somewhere upstairs, the pipes made that tired little sound old houses make when everyone else has left. Grace opened the kitchen drawer because the dishwasher had been making a grinding noise for 3 days, and she wanted to check if the warranty was still good. She expected a receipt, maybe an old manual. Maybe one of those useless little product cards nobody ever fills out. Instead, she found a folded envelope tucked between an old pizza menu and a grocery coupon. It was the kind of thing you almost throw away without looking. Almost. Grace unfolded it with one hand. Inside was a hotel bill. Not a gas station receipt. Not a business lunch. Not some harmless charge Mark could talk his way around. A hotel bill. King Suite. 2 breakfasts. Champagne. Mark Miller. Anniversary romance package. For a moment, Grace did not move. The kitchen stayed exactly the same around her. The refrigerator hummed. The clock clicked. The morning sun sat across the counter like nothing in the world had changed. But something had. And it was not the hotel name that made her hand go cold. It was the payment line. He had used their joint credit card. The same card Mark had said was stretched too thin for Noah's orthodontist. The same account he said could not handle any more pressure. The same money he claimed was too tight for child support, now that they were trying to be realistic about the separation. Grace looked up from the paper. Noah's school photo was still on the refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like a baseball. Her son was smiling in that picture, a little unevenly. The kind of smile boys give when they're not sure if they are too old to smile for their mother. But they do it anyway. Grace stared at that photo, and understood something with a clarity that hurt worse than confusion. Mark was not broke. He had just decided who was worth spending money on. And if stories like this stay with you, subscribe and stay with us. Because sometimes the truth does not arrive screaming. Sometimes it sits quietly in a kitchen drawer, waiting for the one person who still believes the bills are honest. Grace Miller was 48 years old, and she had one of those faces people trusted before they knew anything about her. Not because she looked weak. She did not. There was a steadiness in her, the kind that comes from years of holding a family together with one hand, while using the other to answer emails, pay bills, pack lunches, and keep everyone from noticing how close everything was to falling apart. Grace was not perfect. She worried too much. She overthought small things. She got tired and said nothing because another argument in front of Noah felt more expensive than silence. That was one of her mistakes. Not a foolish mistake, a human one. She had spent years believing peace in the house was worth the cost of swallowing her own feelings. And like a lot of women who do that for too long, she did not notice at first that peace and surrender had started looking almost the same. Still, Grace was the kind of woman a family depends on, without ever calling it dependence. She knew Noah's dental appointments before the reminder emails came in. She knew which bills drafted automatically, and which ones needed a phone call before some late fee appeared like a punishment. She knew Mark took his coffee black when he wanted to look in control, but added cream when he was in a mood and did not want to explain himself. She knew his mother's birthday. She knew which foods he would not touch. She knew where the extra insurance card was, which light bulb in the hallway flickered when it rained, and exactly how Noah sounded when he said, "I'm fine," but meant the opposite. Grace and Mark had been married for more than 20 years. It had not been a perfect marriage. Perfect marriages usually belong in greeting cards, anniversary captions, and the version of events people give when lawyers are listening. But for a long time, theirs had been steady. Not thrilling, not shiny. Steady? And steady can feel like love when you have built a life around it. Mark used to be the man who fixed a leaking faucet on a Sunday night without making a speech about it. He used to stand behind the fence at Noah's baseball games with his arms crossed, pretending he was only there because he had to be, while watching every pitch like the whole season depended on it. He used to call Grace the calm one when the house got loud, when the car needed repairs, when Noah got sick, when life pulled at the seams. Back then, it sounded like affection. Later, she realized it had become a job title. Then, a few years before the hotel bill, Mark began to change. Not in one clean, obvious way. That would have been easier. He did not come home one night as a stranger. He became one slowly, sentence by sentence. The first change was his voice. He started talking about money like it belonged to him alone. Not their money. Not the family's money. His money. His pressure. His sacrifice. If Grace asked about a bill, he called her emotional. If she asked why a payment was late, he said she did not understand what it felt like to carry the family. If she questioned a charge, he sighed like she was a child asking about weather. "You don't get it," he would say. And after a while, she almost believed him. When they began a trial separation, Mark did not fully leave the house. That was part of what made it so strange. He still came by, still used the home office, still kept a few shirts in the closet, still acted like the house belonged to him when he needed convenience, and like the marriage was already over when he wanted freedom. Inside the house, he was a husband when it benefited him. Outside of it, he moved like a single man. He said money was tight. He said the company had cut bonuses. He said the mortgage was suffocating him. He said if Grace expected child support, she needed to be realistic. That was the word he loved. Realistic. He used it whenever he wanted something unfair to sound mature. He turned raising their son into a negotiation. And Noah heard it once. That was the part Grace could not forget. Mark had been standing near the kitchen island, rubbing his forehead like the burden of fatherhood had personally offended him. Grace had asked about Noah's orthodontist payment, and Mark said, low but not low enough, that he was tired of being treated like an ATM. Noah was in the hallway. He did not cry. He did not yell. He did not slam anything. He just turned around and closed his bedroom door softer than usual. That sound stayed with Grace. A quiet click. A small, careful click. Sometimes a child does not have to break down for a mother to know something inside him has been hurt. At first, Grace told herself Mark was stressed. Money does that to people, she thought. Divorce pressure does that. Men panic when they feel like they are losing control. She gave him explanations, because explanations were easier than admitting the man she married had started treating their son like a line item. But then the little comments started carrying the same sour smell. Gaslighting. Mark began building a new version of Grace before she even realized there was a version to fight. In front of friends, he joked that she was bad with money. Not loud enough to sound cruel. Not ugly enough to make the room stop. Just a little smile, a little shake of the head. The kind of joke people laugh at because it feels harmless when they are not the target. But those jokes did work. They planted things. In front of his mother. Mark said Grace had been sensitive lately. He said she was taking the separation hard. He said she was looking for problems. As if questions were instability. As if concern was a mood swing. As if a woman asking where the money went was proof she could not be trusted with the truth. Then one night, in front of Noah, Mark said, "Your mother thinks money grows on trees." Grace looked at him. He looked back like the sentence had simply fallen out of the air. That was the thing about Mark. His cruelty rarely arrived looking like cruelty. It wore clean shirts. It used calm voices. It leaned against counters and sounded reasonable enough that anyone outside the marriage might think Grace was overreacting. He said the joint account was running low. He complained about the mortgage. He said they might have to sell the house if she kept pushing for things they could not afford. But while he said all that, small things began showing up around the edges of his life. His phone stayed face down on the table. His laptop password changed. He took calls in the garage with the door closed, talking low enough that Grace could hear the rhythm of secrecy, but not the words. There were new shirts, a new bottle of cologne, a watch she had not seen before, credit card charges that sounded professional if you wanted them to. Client dinner. Travel expense. Consulting meal. All those clean little labels men use when they believe the name of a charge can hide the nature of it. When Grace asked, Mark gave her that tired look. The one that made her feel foolish before she had finished speaking. Don't start. You're imagining things. This is why I can't talk to you. You just want to punish me because we're separating. After a while, money became his favorite weapon. Noah's orthodontist could wait. Summer camp was too expensive. The school trip was unnecessary. If Grace wanted extras, Mark said, maybe she should pick up more hours. Extras. That was the word he used for the small things that made their son feel like every other kid. But Mark still had restaurant charges, still had that new watch, still had weekends when he suddenly could not be reached. Still said, business is business. Whenever Grace asked why business always seemed to smell like expensive cologne and late-night excuses. His family helped him without meaning to. Or maybe they did mean to. Sometimes families do not protect the truth. They protect the person whose truth would embarrass them the most. Mark's mother told Grace she should be grateful he was still trying to be a father. His sister said men needed space sometimes. Nobody asked how much space Grace had already given. Nobody asked how long Noah had been making himself smaller so the house would not get louder. By then, Mark was not just hiding something. He was preparing the room. He was teaching people to see Grace as greedy before she could prove he was dishonest. He was making child support sound like punishment. He was making responsibility look like an attack. And then came that Tuesday morning. The drawer. The folded envelope. The bill. At first, it was only paper. Folded once, then folded again. Tucked away with old menus and coupons, in the kind of place nobody checks until a dishwasher breaks. Grace opened it because she thought it was a repair receipt. It was not. The hotel name sat at the top in neat black letters. Check-in date, check-out date, room service, champagne, dinner for two, anniversary romance package, Mark Miller. There was no Claire Benton printed beside his name on the main bill. Mark had not been that careless. But near the bottom, under guest notes, one line waited quietly. Guest preference updated by Claire B. Grace read it once. Then again. There are moments when your mind tries to protect you by slowing everything down. Not because the truth is unclear. Because the truth is too clear, and the body needs a second to catch up. Grace knew the name. Claire was the old coworker Mark said was going through a difficult divorce. Claire was the woman who needed advice. Claire was the woman he described as a little lost right now. Claire was the woman Mark once laughed about and said was not even his type. That phrase almost made Grace laugh now. Not because it was funny. Because lies often come with decorations. Grace sat at the kitchen table with the hotel bill in front of her. For 1 minute, she wanted to call him. She wanted to hear his voice change when she said the hotel name. She wanted to ask why champagne came before their son's teeth. Why a king suite mattered more than a medical bill. Why child support was too much, but romance with another woman fit neatly onto their joint credit card. She wanted to throw the bill at him. She wanted to make him look at it. She wanted him to feel shame. But then Grace stopped. Because she knew Mark. If she exploded, he would use the explosion. He would make the bill about her tone. He would make the affair about her insecurity. He would say she invaded his privacy. He would call the charge a misunderstanding. He would warn Claire. He would move money. He would clean the trail before Grace even knew how long that trail had been there. So she did the harder thing. She stayed quiet. Not weak quiet. Not defeated quiet. The other kind. The kind that begins when a woman finally understands that every word she says too early can be used to build a wall against her later. Grace took photos of the bill. Then the envelope. Then the drawer where she found it. She did not open Mark's laptop. She did not touch his phone. She did not hack an account, guess a password, or chase some secret inbox. She documented only what was sitting in her home, in a shared drawer tied to a shared account. That was enough for the first step. That night, Mark came in and dropped his keys on the counter like he still owned the sound of the house. He complained that Noah's insurance card was costing him more time. Grace looked at him. She did not scream. She did not ask about Claire. She did not say hotel. She only asked, "Did you eat?" Mark glanced at her, relaxed a little, and said he had already grabbed something. Of course he had. He thought she was still the same Grace. Tired. Manageable. Too worn down to fight. Too used to swallowing pain for the sake of peace. He did not know that the first piece of his legal undoing was already sitting in her phone. And he did not know that Grace had finally stopped trying to understand the lie. Now she was going to understand the evidence. Grace met Elaine Porter 2 days after finding the hotel bill. Elaine's office was not the kind of place that tried to comfort people. There were no soft paintings on the wall, no scented candle, no gentle music pretending divorce was just another appointment on a calendar. It was a quiet room with a wooden desk, a stack of folders, and a woman in a gray blazer who had seen enough betrayal to stop acting surprised by it. That suited Grace just fine. She did not need someone to gasp. She did not need someone to tell her Mark was awful. She already knew that. What she needed was someone who could look at the wreckage and tell her which pieces mattered. Elaine listened with a pen in her hand. She did not interrupt much. She did not fill the silence with sympathy. She asked the kind of questions that made Grace sit up straighter. Which accounts does he control? What has he told you about child support? Who does Noah live with most of the time? Do you have school emails? Medical bills? Pickup schedules? Messages from Mark? Receipts he refused to pay? Do you have proof that marital money was used for someone outside the marriage? Grace reached into her bag and pulled out the hotel bill. For a second, her fingers did not want to let go of it. That was strange. The paper disgusted her, but it also anchored her. It was no longer just a feeling in her stomach. It was not suspicion. It was not jealousy. It was not a wife being too emotional. It was ink. It was a date. It was a charge. It was a line item Mark could not sigh away. Grace placed it on the desk. Elaine pulled it closer and read slowly. King Suite. Champagne. Anniversary package. Mark Miller. Joint credit card. Elaine did not raise her eyebrows. She did not shake her head. She only leaned back after a moment and tapped the corner of the bill once with her pen. According to what you've told me, she said, in this state, the affair itself may not be the center of the case. But spending marital funds while claiming poverty for child support could matter. Grace let that sentence sink in. It did not heal anything. It did something more useful. It gave the pain a direction. Elaine laid out the rules in a voice that was calm enough to trust. Gather what you can legally access. Bank statements, credit card records, mortgage documents, tax returns, retirement summaries, Noah's medical bills, school payments, text messages Mark sent directly to you, custody calendars, teacher emails, receipts he refused to cover. Then she leaned forward, and her tone became a little sharper. Do not hack him. Do not guess passwords. Do not take his phone. Do not open private accounts. Do not record conversations unless you know the law in your state. Do not confront Claire. Do not post anything online. Do not let rage make you sloppy. Grace nodded at each one. That last rule stayed with her. Rage makes people feel powerful for 5 minutes. Then it becomes the thing their lawyer has to clean up for 6 months. Grace was done giving Mark anything else to use, so she went home and did the quiet work. After Noah went to bed, she sat at the kitchen table with cold coffee and a cheap little scanner that hummed like an insect. She pulled statements from accounts she had the right to access. She made folders. She labeled dates. She matched charges to the nights Mark had said he was working late. At first, she thought the hotel bill might be the main thing. It was not. The hotel bill was the loose thread. Once she pulled it, the whole seam started opening. There was a steakhouse charge on a night Mark had called the client meeting. There was a jewelry purchase 2 days before he told Grace Noah's dental payment would have to wait. There was a spa gift card, a restaurant downtown, a charge from a florist Grace had never received flowers from. Then there was a repeated monthly transfer, small enough not to scream, regular enough not to be accidental. It went to an account Grace did not recognize. There was also a storage unit fee, a payment to a small accounting firm Mark had never mentioned, a few business expenses that looked clean until Grace saw the dates sitting beside Claire's name in her notes. The story widened. It stopped being just a husband sneaking around with another woman. It became a man standing in his own kitchen telling his son there was not enough money, while money was quietly feeding a second life. Grace sent everything to Elaine. No speeches. No late-night emotional essays. Just documents. Elaine filed the first requests for financial disclosure, and Mark responded the way men like Mark often respond when they believe the room still belongs to them. His income looked smaller than it should have. His bonus was missing. His expenses had suddenly grown heavier. His job, according to his paperwork, had become uncertain at exactly the right time. He wanted lower child support. Then he asked for 50-50 custody. That part hurt Grace in a different place. Not because a father wanting time with his son was wrong. It was not. But Grace knew Mark. She knew the difference between a father asking for time and a man using time as a calculator. For 15 years, Mark had not known Noah's dentist's name. He did not know which medication gave Noah a rash. He did not know the name of Noah's math teacher. He had missed school conferences, forgotten practice pickups, and once asked Grace what size shoes Noah wore while standing beside a pair of Noah sneakers in the hallway. But Mark understood numbers. More custody could mean less support. So Grace built what Elaine called a custody binder. It was not pretty. It was not emotional. It was not decorated with little notes about heartbreak. It had appointment records, school emails, medical receipts, homework notices, attendance logs, messages where Mark canceled pickups, messages where he asked Grace to cover another weekend because something came up. Something. Grace started to hate that word. Something had come up the weekend of the hotel. Something had come up the night of the steakhouse. Something had come up 2 days after the spa charge. Something, apparently, had a name. And that name was Claire. Then came the message Grace could not ignore. Mark had come by to use the home office, acting relaxed in that careless way people act when they think they're still smarter than the room. He left his phone on the kitchen counter and stepped into the garage to take a call. Grace did not touch the phone. She did not pick it up. She did not swipe. She did not try to see more than what appeared in front of her. But the screen lit up. One message preview. Just one line. Claire wants the test before the hearing. Grace stood still. There are sentences that do not explain everything, but they open the wrong door in your mind. Claire had a little boy, almost 2 years old. Grace had seen a photo once, by accident, when Mark had scrolled too fast through social media and then locked his screen too quickly. A child was not a scandal. A child was not a weapon. Grace knew that. But if Mark had another possible child support obligation, or if he had been moving money to hide support for someone else, then it mattered. My voice softens here, for disclosure. For Noah. Grace wrote down the exact words she saw and told Elaine. Elaine did not dramatize it. She did not say, "We've got him." Good lawyers rarely say things that clean. Instead, she said, if there is another child support obligation, or if he is transferring money to hide support for someone else, we need to know. But we do this through legal requests, not assumptions. That was the moment Grace stopped asking the smallest question. She stopped asking only whether Mark had cheated. The better questions were uglier. How much family money had he spent? What had he hidden from the court? How far would he go to make his own son look like an expense? And Mark still did not know Grace had a lawyer. That was the dangerous part. Dangerous for him, because a man who thinks he is winning will often show you the map himself. By then, Grace was living two lives. In daylight, she was still Noah's mother. She made breakfast, packed lunch, answered school emails, folded laundry, drove to appointments, picked up groceries, reminded Noah about homework, asked him about practice, pretended not to notice when he watched her face a little too carefully. When Mark came by, she kept her voice even. Did you get the mail? Do you need the office tonight? Are you picking Noah up Saturday? Nothing sharp. Nothing he could screenshot. Nothing he could twist into a story about an unstable woman. At night, Grace became someone else. Not colder, clearer. She scanned documents, labeled folders, sent files to Elaine, updated the custody binder, checked every account she was legally allowed to see, wrote down dates, matched calendars, built a timeline that did not care how charming Mark could sound when he wanted to be believed. She moved slowly, because careful people survive longer than angry people. Mark mistook that quiet for defeat. That was his first mistake. He started speaking to her like a man already practicing for court. Maybe we should keep this civil. Don't make this about money. Noah needs both parents equally. Those sentences sounded noble if you did not know the calendar. Grace knew the calendar. 6 canceled pickups in 2 months. 3 late arrivals. 1 missed school meeting. 2 ignored messages from practice. 1 weekend he could not take Noah because of work stuff, which matched the hotel charge. Another weekend matched the steakhouse bill. 2 more matched business expenses Elaine had circled in red. Grace did not make social media the heart of her case. She was not going to become that woman refreshing Claire's page at 2 a.m. until her eyes burned. But she did note the timeline when Claire posted a cropped dinner photo. No faces. Just a table, a wine glass, and the edge of a man's wrist wearing a watch Grace had bought Mark for their 20th anniversary. That photograph was not enough on its own. But it was a thread, and threads matter when they lead back to records. The cold confrontation came on a rainy evening, the kind where the windows looked black before dinner. Mark sat at the kitchen table and slid a packet toward her. He looked almost kind. That bothered Grace more than anger would have. I think you should sign this, he said. It's fair. And I don't have the money to drag this out. Grace looked down at the settlement proposal. He wanted the house sold quickly. He wanted a larger share of the retirement account. He wanted 50-50 custody. He wanted child support reduced. He wanted Grace to accept part of the credit card debt. Grace turned one page, then another. The debt included the hotel, the restaurant, the gifts, the storage unit, charges that had nothing to do with Noah, except that Mark had used the marriage to pay for them. Grace set the packet down. She did not throw it. She did not laugh. She did not raise her voice. She only asked, "Does Claire know you're calling her hotel bill a family expense?" Mark stopped moving. Just half a second. But half a second is sometimes where the truth lives before the lie catches up. "What are you talking about?" he said. Grace folded her hands on the table. "I know about the hotel. I know about the joint card. I know about the storage unit. And I know someone wants a DNA test before the hearing." His face changed in layers. First anger, then calculation. Then that offended look people wear when they are not innocent, just embarrassed to be caught. "You went through my things." "No," Grace said. "You left a trail through mine." Mark leaned back like she had slapped him. He said Claire had nothing to do with this. He said Grace was twisting things. He said the child was none of her concern. He said she was trying to destroy him. Grace let him talk. That was new for her. Before, she would have defended herself, explained, pleaded.
Tried to pull the conversation back toward fairness, as if fairness was a room Mark had ever intended to enter.
This time, she waited. When he finally ran out of words, she said, "You can tell me whatever story you want. From now on, tell it to my attorney." That was when Mark understood something had shifted. There was no screaming Grace to record. No ugly text to show a judge. No threat. No scene. Just a woman who had stopped asking permission to protect herself. That night, Elaine called. The first financial request had uncovered a connection to a small LLC called Harbor Ridge Consulting. Mark had not listed it properly in his disclosure. Bonus money had passed through it. Some of that money appeared to lead toward the storage unit, private expenses, and payments connected to Claire. Grace stood in the hallway with the phone pressed to her ear. The house was quiet. For once, quiet did not feel like fear. Elaine's voice stayed calm. "We are going to ask the court for more." Grace closed her eyes. Hidden assets were no longer just a suspicion. They were a question the court could ask. And Mark, for the first time in a long time, was about to sit in a room where his calm voice would not be enough. Mark walked into the temporary hearing wearing his best suit. Grace noticed it right away. Not because the suit was impressive, it was not, really. It was just expensive enough to say what Mark always wanted a room to hear before he opened his mouth. "I am controlled. I am responsible. I am the reasonable one here." For a moment, Grace almost smiled. Not because anything about that morning was funny, because it was so perfectly Mark. He had always believed the right jacket could make a lie look organized. The courtroom itself did not care. It was not dramatic. There was no thunder outside. No shouting. No sudden confession. No judge pounding a gavel like a movie, while everyone gasped and turned toward the guilty man. Real courtrooms are usually colder than that. Wooden benches. White lights. Low voices. Papers moving from one hand to another. People pretending their entire lives are not being measured in folders, calendars, receipts, and numbers. Grace sat beside Elaine with her hands folded in her lap. 3 folders rested on the table in front of them. Not thick enough to look theatrical. Thick enough to matter. Across the room, Mark sat straight, his shoulders squared, his face carefully tired. That was another performance. The tired father. The burden provider. The man doing his best while an emotional woman made everything harder. Grace had seen that face before. At dinner tables, in front of friends, on phone calls with his mother. It was the face he wore when he wanted sympathy without accountability. When Mark's side spoke, the story came out clean. Too clean. He wanted 50-50 custody because no one needed his father. He wanted child support to be fair because his income had dropped. He wanted the court to understand that Grace was angry, hurt, and using money as punishment. He said he had always tried to be reasonable. Grace looked down at her hands when he said that. Reasonable. There was that word again. Some people use gentle words the way other people use locked doors. Elaine did not begin with Claire. That would have been easy for Mark to dismiss as bitterness. An affair could be framed as private. Embarrassing, maybe. Painful, certainly. But private. Elaine knew better. She began with responsibility. The custody calendar came first. 6 canceled pickups in 2 months. 3 late arrivals. 1 missed school meeting. 2 ignored messages from practice. A medical bill Grace had paid alone. Emails from teachers showing Grace was the only parent responding about assignments, absences, appointments, and Noah's slipping concentration. Then came the messages Mark had sent himself. Not stolen. Not pulled from some private place. Sent directly to Grace, in his own words. I can't do this weekend. Work stuff. I'll make it up to him. Can you handle Noah again? Something came up. Something. That little word sat there like a stain. Elaine placed the timeline beside the financial records. Work stuff matched hotel charges. Work stuff matched restaurant bills. Work stuff matched a spa purchase. Work stuff, somehow, kept appearing whenever Mark was supposed to be a father. No one had to call him careless. The dates did that for him. Grace watched Mark shift in his chair. Only a little, but she saw it. The first crack is usually small. His attorney argued the charges were private matters. He said they had nothing to do with custody. He said adults in a failing marriage sometimes made mistakes, and those mistakes should not be used to punish a parent. Elaine let him finish. Then she moved to money. That was where Mark's clean story began to lose its shape. Mark had reported no bonus, but the records suggested money had moved through Harbor Ridge Consulting. Mark said it was a business account. Elaine asked why it had not been clearly disclosed. Mark said his accountant handled that. Elaine asked why money connected to that account appeared near the storage unit, private charges, and expenses tied to Claire. Mark said he did not remember. That answer landed badly. It did not explode. It did not need to. It simply sat in the room, because the man asking the court to trust him with half of Noah's life could not explain where his money had gone. Grace did not feel triumphant. That surprised her. She had imagined, once or twice, that if the truth came out, she would feel some sharp satisfaction, some clean little victory, a moment where pain finally paid her back. But sitting there, listening to Mark say he did not remember, she felt something quieter. She felt the burden leave her shoulders. Not all of it, just enough to breathe. For months, Mark had made her feel like the problem was her reaction, her questions, her tone, her worry. Now the questions were not coming from Grace. They were coming from the court. And Mark could not roll his eyes at the court. Then Elaine raised the DNA issue, carefully, not as gossip, not as a cheap scandal, not as a dirty little twist to embarrass him. Elaine framed it as a financial question. There was evidence suggesting Mark might have another possible control obligation involving another child. There were repeated transfers. There was a message referencing a test before the hearing. There were questions about whether Mark had fully disclosed his income, his expenses, and his support responsibilities. Grace looked at Mark when that came up. His face did something strange. Not guilt exactly. Fear. The kind of fear people show when they realize the story they prepared was too small for the truth. The court did not need to solve everything that morning. That was not how real life worked. There was no instant ruling that untangled every lie. But the judge saw enough. Fuller financial disclosure was ordered. Mark could not move assets outside normal expenses. The hidden account had to be explained. The credit card charges tied to Claire would not automatically be treated as family debt. Child support would be reviewed against a fuller picture of Mark's income, not just the smaller version he preferred the court to see. Temporarily, Grace received primary residential custody. Mark received a clear visitation schedule. He was ordered to continue contributing to Noah's medical and school expenses while the finances were reviewed. It was not fireworks. It was better. It was paperwork doing what shouting never could. Karma did not walk into that courtroom wearing a crown. It came as questions. Questions Mark could not smile through. Questions he could not call emotional. Questions he could not send to voicemail. After the hearing, people moved around Grace like the morning was ordinary. Lawyers packed bags. Someone laughed softly near the hallway. A clerk called another case. Life kept moving, because life always does, even when yours has just changed shape. Mark did not look at Grace right away. He spoke to his attorney in a low, tight voice. His jaw worked like he was chewing on something bitter. The careful tiredness was gone now. He looked irritated, exposed, smaller than he had looked when he walked in. That was the thing about men like Mark. They did not fall apart all at once. They lost traction. A little here, a little there, until the ground they had been standing on no longer trusted them. Claire began pulling away after that. Grace heard enough through the legal process to understand the shape of it. Claire had believed some version of Mark's story. Maybe she thought Grace was vindictive. Maybe she thought Mark was a man trying to escape a cold marriage. Maybe she thought he had money, control, and the clean future waiting on the other side. But a man who uses a joint credit card for hotel rooms, hides bonus money, and treats children like financial obstacles is not a prize. He is a warning with cologne on. Claire learned that slowly, then quickly. Messages stopped being answered as fast. Plans became complicated. The confident little life Mark had built outside the marriage began to look less like romance and more like liability. Mark did not leave court in handcuffs. He did not collapse in the hallway. He did not beg Grace to take him back in front of strangers. Real consequences are usually less cinematic than people hope. But they last longer. His attorney asked for more documents. His accountant called twice. Elaine filed additional requests. Claire became harder to reach. The court wanted explanations. And Noah refused dinner with him that week. Mark tried to play it casual when he told Grace. He says he has homework. Grace knew homework was not the real reason. Noah was 15. Old enough to understand more than adults wanted him to. Young enough to be hurt by every part of it. Grace did not speak badly about Mark to him. She refused to do that. Not because Mark deserved protection. Because Noah deserved a mother who did not use him as a battlefield. So when Noah said he did not want to go, Grace simply said, "You can tell your father how you feel. I won't make you pretend." That was all. And it was more mercy than Mark had earned. When Grace walked out of the courthouse that day, she carried 3 folders against her chest. The air in the parking lot was cold. Cars passed on the street. Somewhere nearby, someone was arguing into a phone. Grace stood beside her car for a second and looked at the sky. For the first time in months, she did not feel like she owed anyone an explanation. She had not won everything. Not yet. There were still hearings, documents, questions, bills. Hard conversations with Noah. Quiet evenings when the old pain would come back and sit beside her without asking permission. But Mark had lost the one thing he needed most. The power to tell the story alone. And once that was gone, he was just a man with receipts behind him. 6 months later, Grace Miller did not become rich. There was no mansion waiting for her. No new husband with a private jet. No perfect ending wrapped in gold paper. Mark did not fall to his knees in public and beg the world to forgive him. Real freedom is usually quieter than that. Grace moved into a smaller townhouse on the other side of town. It had no wide backyard, no formal dining room, no long wooden table where she had once imagined holidays, birthdays, and old age. That table had hurt to leave behind. Not because it was expensive, because it held a version of the future Grace had loved before she knew it was already gone. But the new house was calm. That mattered more than square footage. No garage door shook the walls after midnight. No low phone calls stopped the second she walked into the room. No strange hotel bills hid between coupons and old menus. No man walked through the door carrying secrets and called them stress. Noah's bedroom was smaller now. His desk barely fit beside the window. His closet door stuck if he pulled it too fast. The floor creaked near the bed, and the walls were thinner than the old house. But he slept. For the first time in months, Noah slept through the night. Grace noticed that before she noticed anything else. A mother always does. She noticed his shoulders drop when he came home from school. She noticed he stopped listening for the garage door. She noticed he started leaving his backpack in the hallway again. Careless in the ordinary way children should be allowed to be careless. Grace was not wealthy, but she knew where every dollar went. She knew which bills were paid. She knew which accounts were hers. She knew who had a key, who did not, and who would never walk in again, acting like betrayal was just a private mistake. In the evenings, the living room sometimes went completely silent. At first, Grace braced herself for it. Silence had meant danger for so long. Silence used to mean Mark was angry, or hiding something, or waiting for her to ask the wrong question so he could punish her with the right tone. But in the townhouse, silence changed. It softened. It stopped watching her. One night, Grace sat on the couch with a cup of tea going cold in her hands, and realized she was not waiting for anything bad to happen. That was when she understood. Silence did not always mean tension. Sometimes silence meant peace. Mark still tried to rebuild his image. Of course he did. Men like Mark rarely apologize before they rebrand. He posted careful little lines about fatherhood, growth, and new beginnings. He smiled in photos like a man hoping people would forget the receipts before they remembered the truth. Grace did not comment. She did not correct him. She did not send screenshots to anyone. She did not need the world to hate him for her to feel believed. That was another freedom. A better one. She only needed to stop living inside his version of the story. And she had. One night, Noah looked up from his homework at the small kitchen table and asked, "Mom, are we going to be okay?" Grace could have given him a pretty answer. She could have said everything would be easy now. She could have promised that nothing else would hurt. But Grace had learned what false comfort costs. So she looked at her son and told him the truth in the gentlest way she could. "Yes," she said. "Not because nothing bad happened. Because we stopped pretending it didn't." Noah nodded. Not like a child who understood everything. Like a child who finally did not have to carry the silence alone. That was Grace's redemption. Not revenge. Not bitterness. Not Mark's public humiliation. It was smaller than that. And stronger. It was a woman returning to herself after being treated like an expense in someone else's life. It was a mother choosing reality over appearances. It was a home where peace did not have to be negotiated every morning. When a man says he is too broke to care for his child, but still has money for betrayal, the issue is not money. It is priority. And once you see someone's priorities clearly, you cannot unsee them. So when the truth finally shows itself, do not destroy the room. Keep the evidence. Keep your calm. Keep the right people close. And most of all, keep yourself. Because sometimes the win is not watching the person who hurt you suffer. Sometimes the win is hearing your child sleep through the night. Sometimes the win is a smaller house with cleaner air. Sometimes the win is silence that finally feels safe. If this story reminded you of a red flag, subscribe for more stories about betrayal, divorce, custody battles, and the quiet moments when people take their power back.